Conspicuous Consumption in the Leaving Certificate Points System by Aaron Hahn
and Robert Grimes.
As two Leaving Certificate students, hardly a day goes by without study, thoughts about college, or mentions of the words points and CAO. With the new point system in place, now more than ever there's an intense focus on the system of allocating college places in Ireland.
Through our study of economics, and in particular demand, we became aware of the concept of conspicuous consumption as an exception to the law of demand. So what exactly is conspicuous consumption? In our Leaving Cert course, we learned that snob goods are extremely expensive items which appeal to the super wealthy due to the exclusivity of their price. When the price rises, demand rises, and when the price falls, demand falls. A positive relationship.
The theory was introduced by renowned American economist Thorstein Veblen in his 1899 book, The Theory of the Leisure Class, an economic study in the evolution of institutions. In this book, Veblen also discusses pecuniary emulation, which is the mirroring of conspicuous consumption by all social classes, even at the expense of their own material needs and comfort.
More recently, research by economists in the US, such as Charles, Hurst, and Rusinov, suggests that conspicuous consumption is actually more commonly an indicator that a person comes from a poorer background, rather than being an indicator of wealth. People from poorer backgrounds seek status symbols to give them a sense of social mobility. This could be important in the context of our research. Do students who expect to achieve lower grades become more susceptible to this issue?
So what has this got to do with the Leaving Cert? Here we see a normal demand curve, with price on one axis and quantity on the other. It's downward sloping from left to right. So as the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. However, what happens when we put points and college places demanded on these axes? How does the demand curve look then?
To answer this question and begin our investigation, we formed our hypothesis. We theorised that courses which are associated with higher points attract a higher quantity of places demanded, simply because the points are higher. This forms a perverse demand curve. We also hypothesised that in line with recent economic studies and the concept of pecuniary emulation, weaker students will be more susceptible to this trend than higher point students.
So what previous work has been done by economists in this area? Mitchell Stevens, in his book Creating a Class, discusses the abnormal demand curve for college places in the USA. This work, however, is based on the actual monetary cost of the college course. Stevens says that parents or students will demand a place in a course more if the price of the course increases, as this increases the status or exclusivity of the course.
So how does the market work? 60,000 students sit their Leaving Cert exams each year, where they're graded on a normal curve. In this market, currency is points, where the best 6 subject scores are counted at a max of 100 points per subject, and also where an average score is 345 points. An elite score of 600 plus points is only obtained by 0.3% of the Leaving Cert population.
This demand from students interacts with supply from the 39 higher education institutes in Ireland available through the CAO. Demand by the students is measured in terms of preferences. Students rank their most preferred options in the higher education institutes in Ireland, both at level 8 and level 7, from 1 to 10. Students only have access to the previous year's points data when making their decision. So we must bear this in mind when investigating our hypothesis.
We asked various HEIs for data relating to the number of points and demand for each course. Both IT Sligo and DCU obliged, giving us access to 100,000 CAO preferences, representing 200 data points, which allowed us to graph demand for college places in Ireland.
With the data from the universities, we calculated the change in points from year X to year Y and compared this with the change in places demanded from year Y to year Z, using Pearson's correlation coefficient. So for example, we got the change in points from 2014 to 2015 and compared this with the change in places demanded from 2015 to 2016 to get an average correlation coefficient of just under 0.
So the results from experiment 1, remembering our normal demand curve from earlier, downward sloping from left to right, with price and quantity on the axes, we can compare with the result of our first investigation. Here we see the approximate slope of the correlation graph when the change in points was plotted against the change in places demanded, a straight line across the graph, indicating that the demand curve is indeed perverse. However, it would be impossible to make valid conclusions based on this analysis alone. As always in economics, there are a number of influencing factors present. These include the general rise in people attending third-level institutes in Ireland. Their participation rate of 18 to 20-year-olds in third-level courses has grown by 38% since 1980. The government policy of the time regarding the areas of education and emigration. Global factors such as the recession, and changes in the reputation or ranking of the college over time, among others.
With this in mind, we decided to run our second investigation, our Career Choices Economics Survey. We received 100 valid responses from a varied group of respondents, all of whom are currently studying for their leaving certificate in either 5th or 6th year. Respondents were asked to provide some background information for further analysis, such as their expected points in the leaving certificate exams and the education level of their parents. They were then presented with 4 point scenarios, followed by 4 identical non-point scenarios. Each scenario in the experiment consisted of 6 course options, 2 high points alternatives, 2 mid-point alternatives, and 2 low-point alternatives, with broadly similar course options available in each of the 4 different scenarios. The students were asked to rank the courses in order of their preference, from 1 to 6. This experiment allowed us to remove factors such as reputation, the institutes themselves, and the location of the institute, as students were told all courses are situated in their ideal location in university. This leaves us with points as the sole influencing factor in the course choices and any changes in preferences which may follow.
So how do we analyse this scenario data? We compare the preference order from the point scenarios to the preference order from the corresponding non-point scenarios and analyse trends in these changes. As a result of analysing data from Investigation 2, we wanted answers to the following questions. Do points change preferences? And does pecuniary emulation occur?
Upon analysis of the data, we see that in terms of overall preference changes, 98% of respondents changed their course preferences at least once between the matching pairs of scenarios. When we break this down into the number of preference changes per person, we see that the modal value is 6 to 10 preference changes per person from a possible 24, and that a large amount lie above this value also.
With these results in mind, we were able to say with certainty that points, as the only variable factor in these scenarios, changes the preference of students.
We then reviewed the preference changes of students in accordance with their expected points. Students who expected to get lower points reduced their demand for high points alternatives by 25% in the non-point scenarios, showing strong evidence for the existence of pecuniary emulation in this market. There was also an increase in demand for low points alternatives in the second set of scenarios amongst this grouping. Students expecting to achieve average points showed a slight increase in demand for high points alternatives. While irrational preference changing from one subject grouping to another was commonplace in this group, the changes did follow the law of demand in that students demanded more lower points alternatives when available and less of higher points alternatives. The higher points grouping showed little to no change in terms of the overall demand for the different alternatives, and only the general trend of some irrational preference changes as discovered earlier. This is again evidence for the existence of pecuniary emulation, in line with the recent work of economists in the field of conspicuous consumption.
Further interesting trends, which we established from the background information gathered, showed that the lower point grouping was at odds with the higher point students in 2 key areas: the influence on friends and the rankings of the college on college choices. Lower point students, on average, considered friends as an important influence on their college choice, whereas higher point students, by large, did not. Regarding university ranking, higher point students, on average, considered this more important than lower point students.
To conclude, we can say from our analysis that conspicuous consumption does occur in the leaving certificate point system in Ireland, most notably among weaker students. This allows us to verify the existence of Veblen's concept of pecuniary emulation in the marketplace. Those students who do not expect to have many points are the students whose preferences are most affected by the point system and by the conspicuous consumption phenomenon.
Considering the concept of social mobility discussed earlier, it could be said that pecuniary emulation potentially acts as a barrier to social mobility for the weaker student, as they will shift their preferences when points are present to higher points courses, which they will most likely not be accepted onto, instead of pursuing a lower points course which will better serve their tastes, needs and future career. This again ties in with Veblen's pecuniary emulation concept, as conspicuous consumption is carried out by students to their own disadvantage.
Finally, preference changes made by students overall from one subject area to another simply because of the presence of points in one scenario would lead behavioural economists to suggest that the consumer in this marketplace is irrational.